This is part 4 of The Alchemist from me, read for you in ASMR style. ASMR Katz. Hello, my mouse. Put the headphones in your ear like I did, because this is a high quality recording and I will read now part 4 of The Alchemist for you in ASMR style. It is absolutely worth it to check out part 1 till 3 because this book is amazing to read between the lines and there's so much to listen to that it would be a waste if you wouldn't do that. And when you see here the 4th part, you also will see the 1st to the 3rd part. Feel free to follow, subscribe, click on the notification bell and comment that I'm able to read even more for you. So let's start. The men climbed the hill, and they were tired when they reached the top. But there they saw a crystal shop that offered a refreshing mint tea. They went into and drank the tea, which was served in a beautiful crystal glass. My wife never thought of this, said one, and he bought some crystal. He was entertaining guests that night, and the guests would be impressed by the beauty of the glassware. The other men remarked that tea was always more delicious when it was served in crystal, because the aroma was retained. The third said, it was a tradition in the Orient to use crystal glasses for tea because it had magical powers. Before long, the news spread and great many people began to climb the hill to see the shop that was doing something new in a trade that was so old. Other shops were opened that served tea in crystal, but they weren't at the top of a hill and they had little businesses. Eventually, the merchant had to hire 2 more employees. He began to import enormous quantities of tea along with the crystal, and his shop was sought out by men and women with thirst for things new, and in that way the months passed. The boy awoke before dawn. It had been 11 months and 9 days since he had first set foot on the African continent. He dressed in his Arabian clothing of white linen, bought especially for this day. He put his head cloth in place and secured it with a ring made of camel skin. Wearing his new sandals, he descended the stairs silently. The city was silent, sleeping. He prepared himself a sandwich and drank some hot tea from a crystal glass. Then he sat in the sun-filled doorway, smoking the hookah. He smoked in silence, thinking of nothing, and listening to the sound of the wind that brought the scent of the desert. When he had finished his smoke, he reached into one of his pockets and sat there for a few moments, regarding what he had withdrawn. It was a bundle of money, enough to buy himself 120 sheep, a return ticket, and a license to import products from Africa into his own country. He waited patiently for the merchant to awaken and open the shop. Then 2 went off to have some more tea. "I'm leaving today," said the boy. "I have the money. I need to buy my sheep, and you have the money, you need to go to Mecca." The old man said nothing. "Will you give me your blessing?" asked the boy. "You will have helped me," the man continued to prepare his tea, saying nothing. Then he turned to the boy. "I am proud of you," he said. "You brought a new feeling into my crystal shop. But you know that I am not going to go to Mecca, just as you know that you are not going to buy your sheep." "Who told you that?" asked the boy. "Maktub," said the old crystal merchant, and he gave the boy his blessing. The boy went to his room and packed his belongings. They filled 3 sacks. As he was leaving, he saw in the corner of the room his old shepherd's pouch. It was bunched up, and he had hardly thought of it for a long time. As he took his jacket out of the pouch, thinking to give it someone in the street, the 2 stones fell to the floor. Urim and Thummim. It made the boy think of the old king, and it startled him to realize how long it had been since he had thought of him. For nearly a year he had been working innocently, thinking only of putting aside enough money so that he could return to Spain with pride. Never stop dreaming, the old king has said. Follow the omens. The boy picked up Urim and Thummim, and once again had the strange sensation that the old king was nearby. He had worked hard for a year, and the omens were that it was time to go. "I'm going to go back to doing just what I did before," the boy thought. "Even so, the sheep didn't teach me to speak Arabic." But the sheep had taught him something even more important, that there was a language in the world that everyone understood, a language the boy had used throughout the time that he was trying to improve things at the shop. It was the language of enthusiasm, of things accomplished with love and purpose, and as part of a search for something believed in and desired. Tangier was no longer a strange city, and he felt that, just as he had conquered this place, he could conquer the world. When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you to achieve it, the old king had said. But the old king hadn't said anything about being robbed, or about endless deserts, or about people who know what their dreams are, but don't want to realize them. The old king hadn't told him that the pyramids were just a pile of stones, or that anyone could build on his backyard. And he had forgotten to maintain that when you have enough money to buy a flock larger than the one you had before, you should buy it. The boy picked up his pouch and put it with his other things. He went down the stairs and found the marching waiting on a foreign couple, while 2 other customers walked about the shop, drinking tea from crystal glasses. It was more activity than usual for this time of the morning. From where he stood, he saw for the first time that the old merchant's hair was very much like the hair of the old king. He remembered the smile of the candy seller on his first day in Tangier when he had nothing to eat and nowhere to go. That smile had also been like the old king's smile. It's almost as if he had been here and left his mark. And yet, none of these people has ever met the old king. On the other hand, he said that he always appeared to help those who are trying to realize their personal legend. He left without saying goodbye to the crystal merchant. He didn't want to cry with the other people there. He was going to miss the place and all good things he learned. He was more confident in himself, and felt as though he could conquer the world. But I'm going back to the fields that I know, to take care of my flock again, he said to himself with certainty, but he was no longer happy with his decision. He had worked for an entire year to make a dream come true, and that dream, minute by minute, was becoming less important. Maybe because that wasn't really his dream. Who knows? Maybe it's better to be like the crystal merchant, never go to Mecca, and just go through life wanting to do so, he thought again, trying to convince himself. But as he held Urim and Thummim in his hand, they had transmitted to him the strength and will of the old king. By coincidence, or maybe it was an omen, the boy thought, he came to the bar he had entered on his first day there. The thief wasn't there, and the owner brought him a cup of tea. I can always go back to being a shepherd, the boy thought. I learned how to care for sheep, and I haven't forgotten how it's done. But maybe I never have another chance to get to the pyramids in Egypt. The old man wore a breastplate of gold, and he knew about my past. He really was a king, a wise king. The hills of Andalusia were only 2 hours away, but there was an entire desert between him and the pyramids. Yet, the boy felt that there was another way to regard his situation. He was actually 2 hours closer to his treasure. The fact that the 2 hours had stretched into an entire year didn't matter. I know why I want to go back to my flock, he thought. I understand sheep. They are no longer a problem, and they can be good friends. On the other hand, I don't know if the desert can be a friend, and it's in the desert that I have to search for my treasure. If I don't find it, I can always go home. I finally have enough money and all the time I need, so why not? He suddenly felt tremendously happy. He could always go back to being a shepherd. He could always become a crystal salesman again. Maybe the world had other hidden treasures, but he had a dream, and he had met with the king. That doesn't happen to just anyone. He was planning as he left the bar. He had remembered that one of the crystal merchant suppliers transported his crystals by means of caravans that crossed the desert. He held Urim and Thummim in his hand. Because of those 2 stones, he was once again on the way to his treasure. I'm always nearby when someone wants to realize their personal legend, the old king had told him. What could it cost to go over the supplier's warehouse and find out if the pyramids were really that far away? The Englishman was sitting on a bench in a structure that smelled of animals, sweat, and dust. It was part warehouse, part coral. I never thought I'd end up a place like this, he thought, as he leafed through the pages of a chemical journal. 10 years at the university, and here I am in a coral. But he had to move on. He believed in omens. All his life and all his studies were aimed at finding the one true language of the universe. First, he had studied Esperanto, then the world's religions, and now it was alchemy, He knew how to speak Esperanto. He understood all the Maya religions well, but he wasn't yet an alchemist. He had unrevealed the truths behind important questions, but his studies had taken him to a point beyond which he couldn't seem to go. He had tried in vain to establish a relationship with an alchemist. But the alchemists were strange people who thought only about themselves and almost always refused to help him. Who knows? Maybe they had failed to discover the secret of the masterwork, the philosopher's stone, and for this reason kept the knowledge to themselves. He had already spent much of furniture left to him by his father, fruitlessly seeking the philosopher's stone. He had spent enormous amounts of time at the great libraries of the world, and had purchased all the rarest and most important volumes on an alchemy. In one he had read that, many years ago, a famous Arabian alchemist had visited Europe. It was said that he was more than 200 years old, and that he had discovered the philosopher's stone in the elixir of life. The Englishman had been profoundly impressed by the story, but he would never have thought it more than just a myth, had not a friend of his returning from an archaeological expedition in the desert told him about an Arab that was possessed of expansional powers. He lives at the Fayum oasis, his friend said, and people say that he is 200 years old and is able to transform any metal into gold. The Englishman could not contain his excitement. He cancelled all his commitments and pulled together the most important of his books, and now here he was, sitting inside a dusty, smelly warehouse. Outside, a huge caravan was being prepared for a crossing of the Sahara and was scheduled to pass through Al-Fayum. I'm going to find that damned alchemist, the Englishman thought, and the odor of the animals became a bit more terrible. A young Arab, also loaded down with baggage, entered and greeted the Englishman. "Where are you bound?" asked the young Arab. "I'm going into the desert," the man answered, turning back to his reading. He didn't want any conversation at this point. What he needed to do was review all he had learned over the years, because the alchemist would certainly put him to the test. The young Arab took out a book and began to read. The book was written in Spanish. That's good, thought the Englishman. He spoke Spanish better than Arabic, and if the boy was going to Al-Fahim, there would be someone to talk to when there were no other important things to do. "That's strange," said the boy as he tried once again to read the burial scene that began the book. "I've been trying for 2 years to read this book, and I never got to pass these few words. Even without a king to provide and interrupt them, he was unable to concentrate. He still had some doubts about the decisions he had made, but he was able to understand one thing. Making a decision was only the beginning of things. When someone makes a decision, he is really diving into a strong current that will carry him to places he had never dreamed of when he first made the decision. When I decided to seek out of my treasure, I never imagined that I wound up working in a crystal shop, he thought. And joining this caravan may have been my decision, but where it goes is going to be a mystery to me." Nearby, Was the Englishman reading a book? He seemed unfriendly and had looked irritated when the boy had entered. They might even had become friends, but the Englishman closed off the conversation. The boy closed his book. He felt that he didn't want to do anything that might make him look like the Englishman. He took Urim and Thummim from his pocket and began playing with them. The stranger shouted, "Urim and Thummim!" In a flash, the boy put them back in his pocket. "They are not for sale," he said. "They are not worth much," the Englishman answered. "They are only made of rock crystal, and there are millions of rock crystals in the earth. But those who know about such things would know that those are Urim and Thummim. I didn't know that they had them in this part of the world. They were given to me as present by a king," the boy said. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he put his hand in his pocket and took out 2 stones that were the same as the boy's. "Did you say a king?" he asked. "I guess you don't believe that a king would talk to someone like me, a shepherd," he said, wanting to end the conversation. Not at all. It was the shepherd who were the first to recognize a king that the rest of the world refused to acknowledge. So it's not surprising that kings would not talk to shepherds. And he went on, fearing that the boy wouldn't understand what he was talking about. It's in the Bible, the same book that taught me about Urim and Thummim. These stones were the only form of divination permitted by God. The priests carried them in a golden breastplate. The boy was suddenly happy to be there at the warhouse. "Maybe this is an omen," said the Englishman half aloud. "Who told you about omens?" The boy's interest was increasing by the moment. "Everything alive is an omen," said the Englishman, now closing the journal he was reading. "There is a universal language understood by everybody, but already forgotten. I am in the search of that universal language among other things. That's why I'm here. I have to find a man who knows that universal language. An alchemist." The conversation was interrupted by the warehouse boss. "You're in luck, you two," the fat Arab said. "There's a caravan leaving today for Al-Fayim." "But I'm going to Egypt," the boy said. "Al-Fayim is in Egypt," said the Arab. "What kind of Arab you are?" "That's a good luck omen," the Englishman said, after the fat Arab had gone out. "If I could, I'd write a huge encyclopedia just about the world's luck and conscience. It's with those words that the universal language is written." He told the boy it was no coincidence that he had met him with Urim and Thummim in his hand, and he asked the boy if he too were in the search of the alchemist. "I'm looking for a treasure," said the boy, and he immediately regretted having said it. But the Englishman appeared not to attach importance to it. "In a way, so am I," he said. "I don't even know what alchemy is," the boy was saying when the warehouse boss called him to come outside. "I'm the leader of the caravan," said a dark-eyed, bearded man. "I told the power of life and death for every person I take with me. The desert is a capricious lady, and sometimes she drives men crazy." There were almost 200 people gathered there, and 400 animals. Camels, horses, mules, and fowl. In the crowd were women, children, and a number of men with swords had their belts and rifles slung on their shoulders. The Englishmen had several suitcases filled with books. There was a babel of noise, and the leader had to repeat himself several times for everyone to understand what he was saying. There are a lot of different people here, and each has his own God. But the only God I serve is Allah, and in His name I swear that I will do everything possible once again to win out over the desert. But I want each and every one of you to swear by the God you believe in that you will follow my orders no matter what. In the desert, disobedience means death. There was a murmur from the crowd. Each was swearing quietly to his or her own God. The Englishman said nothing, and the murmur lasted longer than a simple wolf would have. The people were also praying to heaven for protection. A long note was sounded on a bugle, and everyone mounted up. The boy and the Englishman had bought camels and climbed uncertainly onto their backs. The boy felt sorry for the English camel, loaded down as he was with the cases of books. There is no such thing as coincidence, said the Englishman, picking up the conversation where it had been interrupted in the warehouse. I am here because a friend of mine heard of an Arab who... But the caravan began to move, and it was impossible to hear what the Englishman was saying. The boy knew what he was about to describe, so the mysterious chain that links on a thing another, the same chain that had caused him to become a shepherd, that had caused his recurring dream, that had brought him to a city near Africa to find a king, and to be robbed in order to meet a crystal merchant. The closer one gets to realizing his personal legend, the more that personal legend becomes his true reason for being, thought the boy. The caravan moved toward the east. It traveled during the morning, halted when the sun was at its strongest, and resumed late in the afternoon. The boy spoke very little with the Englishman, who spent most of the time with his books. The boy observed in silence the progress of the animals and people across the desert. Now, everything was quite different from how it was that day that he had set out. Then there had been confusion and shouting, the cries of children and the whining of animals, all mixed with the nervous orders of the guide and merchants. But in the desert there was only the sound of the eternal wind and of the hoofbeats of the animals. Even the guide spoke very little to another. I've crossed these sands many times, said one of the camel drivers one night, but the desert is so huge and the horizons so distant that they make a person feel small and as a should remain silent. The boy understood intuitively what he meant. Even without ever having set a foot in the desert before, whenever he saw the sea or a fire, he felt silent, impressed by the element's force. I've learned things from the sheep, and I've learned things from crystal, he thought. I can learn something from the desert too. It seems old and wise. The wind never stopped, and the boy remembered the day he had sat at the fort in Tarifa with the same wind blowing in his face. It reminded him of the wool from his sheep who were now seeking food and water in the fields of Andalusia, as they always had. "They are not my sheep anymore," he said to himself without nostalgia. "They must be used to their new shepherd and have probably already forgotten me. That's good. Creatures like the sheep that are used to traveling now about moving on." He thought of the merchant's daughter and was sure that she had probably married, perhaps to a baker or to another shepherd who could read and could tell her excited stories. After all, he probably wasn't the only one, but he was excited at his intuitive understanding of the camel driver's comment. Maybe he was also learning the universal language that deals with the past and the present of people. Hunches, his mother used to call them. The boy was beginning to understand that intention is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, where the histories of all people are connected, and we are all able to know everything, because it's all written there. "Maktub," the boy said, remembering the crystal merchant. The desert was all sand in some stretches and rocky in others. When the caravan was blocked by a boulder, it had to go around it. If there was a large rocky area, they had to make a major detour. If the sand was too fine for the animals' hooves, they sought a way where the sand was more substantial. In some places, the ground was covered with the salt of dried-up lakes. The animals balked at such places, and the camels' drivers were forced to dismount and unburden their charges. The drivers carried the freight themselves over such treacherous footing, and then reloaded the camels. If a guide were to fall ill or die, the camel drivers would draw lots of an appointment, a new one. But all this happened for one basic reason. No matter how many detours and adjustments it's made, the caravan moved toward the same compass point. Once obstacles were overcome, it returned to its course, sightening on a star that indicated the location of the oasis. When the people saw that star shining in the morning sky, they knew where one right courses toward water, palm trees, shelter, and other people. It was only the Englishman who was unaware of all of this. He was, for the most part, immersed in reading his books. The boy too had his book, and he had tried to read it during the first 5 days of the journey. But he found it much more interesting to observe the caravan and listen to the wind. As soon as he had learned to know his camel better and to establish a relationship with him, he threw the book away. Also, the boy had developed a supposition that each time he opened the book, he would learn something important. He decided it was an unnecessary burden. He became friendly with the camel driver who traveled alongside him. At night, as they sat around the fire, the boy related to the driver his adventures as a shepherd. During one of these conversations, the driver told of his own life. "I used to live near El Kairum," he said. "I had my orchid, my children, and a life that would change not at all until I died. One year, when the crop was the best ever, we all went to Mecca, and I satisfied the only human obligation in my life. I could die happily, and that made me feel good." One day, the earth began to tremble, and the Nile overflowed its banks. It was something that I thought could happen only to others, never to me. My neighbors feared they would lose all their olive trees in the flood, and my wife was afraid that we would lose our children. I thought that everything I owned would be destroyed. The land was ruined, and I had to find some other way to earn a living. So now I'm a camel driver. But that disaster taught me to understand the world of Allah. People need to fear the unknown if they are capable of achieving what they need and want. We are afraid of losing what we have, whether it's our life or our position and property. But this fear evaporates when we understand that our life stories and the history of the world were written by the same hand. Sometimes the caravan met with another. One always had something that the other needed, as if everything were indeed written by one hand. As they sat around the fire, the camel drivers exchanged information about windstorms and told stories about the desert. At other times, mysterious hooded men would appear. They were witnesses who did civilly along the caravan route. They provided warnings about thieves and barbarian tribes. They came in silence and departed the same way, dressed in black garments that showed only their eyes. One night, a camel driver came to the fire where the Englishman and the boy were sitting. There are rumors of tribal wars, he told them. The three fell silent. The boy noted that there was a sense of fear in the air, even so no one said anything. Once again he was experienced the language without words, the universal language. The Englishman asked if they were in danger. Once you get into the desert, there is no going back, said the camel driver. And when you can't go back, you have to worry only about the best way of moving forward. The rest is up to Allah, including the danger. And he concluded by saying the mysterious words, Maktub. You should pay more attention to the caravan, the boy said to the Englishman after the camel driver had left. We make a lot of detours, but we are always heading for the same destination. And you ought to read more about the world, answered the Englishman. Books are like caravans in the respect. The immense collection of people and animals began to travel faster. The days had always been silent, but now even the nights, when the travelers were accustomed to talking around the fires, had also become quiet. And one day the leader of the caravan made the decision that the fire should no longer be lighted so as not to attract attention to the caravan. The travelers adopted the practice of arranging the animals in a circle at night, sleeping together in the center, as protection against the nocturnal cold, and the leader posted armed sentinels at the fingers of the group. The Englishman was unable to sleep one night. He called to the boy, and they took a walk along the dunes surrounding the encampment. There was a full moon, and the boy told the Englishman the story of his life. The Englishman was fascinated with the part about the progress achieved at the crystal shop after the boy began working there. That's the principle that governs all things, he said. In alchemy, it's called the soul of the world. When you want something with all your heart, that's when you are close to the soul of the world. It's always a positive force. He also said that this was not just a human gift, that everything on the face of the earth had a soul, whether mineral, vegetable or animal, or even just a simple thought. Everything on earth is being contagiously transformed because the earth is alive and it has a soul. We are part of the soul, so we rarely recognize that it's working for us. But in the crystal shop, you probably realized that even glasses were collaborating in your success. The boy thought about that for a while as he looked at the moon and the bleached sand. I have watched the caravan as it crossed the desert, he said. The caravan and the desert speak the same language, and it's for that reason that the desert allows the crossing. It's going to test the caravans every step to see if it's in time, and if it is, we will make it to the oasis. If either of us had joined this caravan based only on personal courage, but without understanding the language, this journey would have been much more difficult. They stood there looking at the moon. That's the magic of omens, said the boy. I've seen how the guides read the sign of the desert and how the soul of the caravan speaks to the soul of the desert. The Englishman said, I better pay more attention to the caravan, and I better read your books, said the boy. This was part 4 of The Alchemist. Make sure to listen to part 1 to 3, and if you liked this part 2, then also be invited to join for all the next parts who come. There are still some more to read for me. I personally fell in love with this book because it is amazing to read between the lines and it's so well written. I would love to could write like this. Please feel free to follow, subscribe, and click on the notification bell. And always be invited to comment. I try to answer every comment out there to show you my support, and also I am very happy that you show yours. Have a good time. And if you want to listen now to even more stories, then feel free to click yourself through my feed, because I read a lot more books, not just this.